No one asked Noah if he wanted to be in a book. Not the publisher, not the editor, and certainly not his Aunt Joyce, who mailed him a signed copy with a sticky note on the front cover that read, "This is for you." For weeks after its release, Bellevue, his small, tight-knit hometown, buzzed with admiration. The town library put the memoir on display with a banner that said, "Local Voices." Church ladies brought it up after service, saying it opened their eyes. A local newspaper even published an article, "Joyce Winters, retired teacher, gives voice to LGBTQ youth." But Noah, he felt like a ghost watching people clap for the eulogy of a life he still had to live. Joyce's book, Breaking Through the Silence, was praised as raw and honest. She wrote about a young man in the Midwest, born into a conservative family, who came out as gay and faced rejection, isolation, religious shame, and suicidal thoughts. She wrote about his struggle to survive in a household where love came with conditions, about his departure from home with nothing but a backpack, and about the night he sat in a hospital parking lot wondering if the world would notice if he disappeared. The town hailed her as brave for telling such a painful story, but the story wasn't hers. Noah, now 34, lived quietly just 3 blocks from the library that displayed her book. He worked as a home health aide, caring for elderly patients and driving them to appointments. He was the kind of person who remembered how you liked your tea and whether your dog had a vet visit next week. People described him as kind, steady, reliable, and completely blindsided. The book didn't mention his name, but it didn't have to. It mentioned the town, the family structure, the year of his high school graduation. It described moments only Joyce could have known from secondhand stories: his father shouting verses from the Bible, his mother sitting in silence, the way he stopped singing in the church choir after he turned 17. Even his old classmate, who worked at the post office, asked casually one morning, "Hey, that kid in Joyce's book, that was you, wasn't it?" What stung more than the exposure was the betrayal wrapped in compliments. The book's dedication read, "To my brave nephew, who showed me what silence sounds like." She called him brave, but never called him. She turned his years of trauma into chapters, polished them, and presented them as inspiration for the world to digest. Noah didn't want recognition. He wanted dignity. He wanted his past to be his own messy, sacred, and private. He didn't respond to the book. He didn't call or write. But the silence he gave her back wasn't the same as the silence she claimed to understand. Hers was performative. His was personal. Only weeks later, while assisting a patient with dementia who kept repeating lines from the newspaper article, did Noah finally whisper to himself in the privacy of a living room filled with oxygen tanks and old quilts, "I didn't survive, so someone else could tell people how strong I was." The world loved the version of him Joyce had written. But the real Noah, he still carried the weight of being reduced to a story. If this story moved you or reminded you of a moment where someone else told your truth without your permission, subscribe to Heart Stories, because here, every story belongs to the one who lived it. Joyce's book didn't fade after a few weeks. If anything, it grew louder. The library hosted a reading. Local veterans asked her to speak at their Sunday breakfast. The church put together a panel on understanding the modern family. And Joyce, with her soft voice and pearl necklace, sat beneath the cross and explained how forgiveness could rebuild bridges, even for boys like Noah, though she never said his name. But everyone knew, that month, Noah stopped going to church. He took different routes to avoid Main Street, where his face had become a story strangers smiled about. He skipped the grocery store on Thursdays because that's when Miss Debbie from the prayer group would always be there, asking how he was adjusting and telling him she'd bought 5 copies of the book. She even mailed one to her cousin in Kansas. What no one knew was that Noah wasn't adjusting. He was unraveling. The hardest part wasn't the book itself. It was the way people looked at him now, like they knew him, like they had followed him into that hospital parking lot Joyce described, like they had sat beside him in his room when he stopped eating for 3 days. But they hadn't. Not one of them had picked up the phone that summer when his father slammed the door and told him to find somewhere else to spread that sickness. Not one had knocked on the garage where Noah slept for 2 weeks before finding a place of his own. Now they handed him compliments like apology cards never sent. At work, things shifted too. His supervisor at the home care agency called him into the office one afternoon and closed the door. She smiled politely and said, "Noah, we're proud of you, and we're aware there may be extra attention on you right now, with the book and all. Just know, we support you, but let us know if the publicity interferes with your work." He nodded, thanked her, then left early, claiming a headache. He didn't tell her he hadn't read the entire book yet. He couldn't. He stopped halfway through chapter 9 when Joyce tried to describe how the young man found strength in his shame. It wasn't just the inaccuracies, it was the theft. There's a difference between being seen and being displayed, between healing and being turned into a teaching tool. Noah's pain had become someone else's redemption arc. Joyce was being praised for her bravery in telling a story she had only ever viewed through the cracks of family gossip and distant dinners. The worst moment came during a patient visit. Mr. Leon, a retired school principal, with fading memory but razor-sharp instincts, reached for Noah's hand while sitting in his recliner. "You made it," he whispered. "I read the book. You made it." Noah nodded, trying to smile. Leon added, "I told my son to never come back when he came out." That was 20 years ago, after reading what you went through, when I called him. That night, Noah sat in his car long after his shift ended, staring at his own reflection in the rearview mirror. Something was breaking inside, not from hurt, but confusion. How could a stolen story create a second chance for someone else? How could something so wrong lead to something so good? He didn't have an answer. But he knew he had lost control of his narrative. And in a town like Bellevue, where stories pass faster than seasons, staying silent wasn't privacy anymore. It was permission. Joyce had taken his past, but she wouldn't take his voice. Not again. Noah didn't tell anyone he was writing. Not his coworkers, not the few friends he kept since high school, not even his therapist. It started one quiet evening after dinner, at the kitchen table with only the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the wall clock to keep him company. The first sentence took him an hour. The second came faster. By midnight, his fingers hurt, but he didn't stop. He didn't know if it was going to be a letter, an essay, or just something to print and burn. All he knew was that it had to come from him. No more borrowed voices, no more filtered versions, no more stories told in his name. He wasn't interested in making people cry or applaud. He just wanted the truth to breathe. The letter began as a response to the book. He addressed it simply to the woman who wrote about my silence. But it evolved into something bigger, not a rebuttal, but a reflection, a correction, a reclamation. He wrote about the moments Joyce had gotten wrong, about the scenes she romanticized, about the damage of turning trauma into metaphor. He described what it felt like to be turned into a character while still trying to be a person. And then he wrote the part she never would have known, about the years after leaving home, about the man he loved and lost in Portland, about rebuilding trust with his mother in quiet Sunday calls, about surviving not through triumph, but through routine, patience, and persistence. By the time he reached the final page, Noah realized he wasn't writing to Joyce anymore. He was writing to everyone who had ever read the book and thought they understood him. And maybe more importantly, he was writing to anyone who'd ever been spoken for. Instead of spoken to, he submitted the piece to a small LGBTQ+ journal out of Chicago. They accepted it within 48 hours and ran it as their cover story under the title, "I Was Not Her Story to Tell." It spread faster than he expected. By the end of the week, it was picked up by 3 larger platforms, including one national outlet known for publishing personal essays with cultural impact. Suddenly, the same people who had praised Joyce's memoir were emailing her asking for comment. A professor at Ohio State added Noah's piece to his media ethics course. An activist group in Vermont shared it with the caption, "Pain doesn't belong in someone else's narrative without consent." Then came the email that shifted everything. A producer from TEDx Columbus wrote to Noah, saying his voice deserved a stage, if he was willing to speak. He wasn't, not at first. Public speaking was Joyce's world. He was the one who listened, not the one with the mic, but something about the invitation wouldn't leave him alone. Maybe because, for the first time, someone was asking him, not taking from him. He sat with it for days. Then, while driving home from a hospice visit, he saw a flyer taped to a telephone pole near the town square. Joyce Winter's book signing and community talk. It listed the date, the church, the topic, the power of telling our stories. That night, Noah opened the TEDx invitation again and clicked accept. He didn't tell anyone. He just started preparing. Not a speech, a reckoning. He spent the next few weeks organizing his words the way he wished someone had done for him years ago, carefully, honestly, without spectacle. He didn't want to call anyone out by name. He wasn't seeking revenge. He was seeking clarity. And then, 1 week before his TEDx talk, something unexpected arrived in the mail. A small envelope. No return address, just his name, written in a familiar handwriting, slightly shaky, always too small. Inside, a letter from Joyce. Noah, it began. I didn't know how much I hurt you. I thought I was honoring you. I see now I was using you. You didn't deserve that. You don't owe me forgiveness, but I want you to have your voice back, whatever that looks like. Attached was a printed retraction request she had sent to her publisher, asking for the book to be pulled from the next local printing. She offered no defense, only a single closing line. Tell your story, Noah. I was never meant to tell it for you. For the first time in months, he cried, not from betrayal, but from the strange, fragile grace of accountability. It didn't erase the damage, but it opened a door, and Noah had already decided he would walk through it. The red circle on the stage wasn't big, but to Noah, it felt endless. He stood just behind the curtain, gripping the note cards in his hand even though he knew he wouldn't use them. The lights were warm on his skin. The air felt heavier than usual. He could hear the audience settling in the soft coughs, the quiet shifting of programs, the murmurs of anticipation. His name had just been announced. Noah Winters, home healthcare worker, Bellevue, Ohio. Topic: who gets to tell the story? He stepped forward. Not once in his life had he imagined himself standing in front of hundreds of people to talk about something he never asked to become public. But now that he was here, there was a strange stillness inside him. He wasn't shaking. He wasn't sweating. He wasn't even afraid. He was ready. He opened simply. I wasn't always a story. I was a person first. A pause, a breath. And then one day, without my permission, someone decided my life, my pain could be useful, inspirational, marketable. The room was silent. I was still trying to make peace with my past when I learned that someone else had packaged it, polished it, and published it. Noah didn't mention Joyce by name. He didn't have to. This wasn't about her anymore. This was about a world that romanticized suffering and praised those who told stories about people instead of listening to them. He talked about the book without citing it. He talked about being recognized at the grocery store, about the assumptions, the unasked for sympathy, the exhaustion of being a symbol when he hadn't chosen to be. But he also talked about something else. He talked about a man named Mr. Leon, a retired principal who had once disowned his gay son, and how the stolen story helped him reconnect with the child he'd pushed away. Noah described the moment he realized that even pain, when taken from you, could echo outward and become something unintentional and strange, both harmful and healing. I'm not here to take credit for someone else's growth, he said, but I am here to say no one should have to lose ownership of their voice in order to help someone else find theirs. He looked out over the crowd. Eyes were locked on him. Not a single person shifted in their seat. He continued, there's a difference between telling a story with someone and telling it for them. One gives power, the other takes it. He closed with a truth that had only come to him days before. I used to think silence was my shield, that not speaking meant protecting myself. But I've learned something now. Silence can protect you, but it can also erase you. And then, in the last few seconds, he added something unexpected. I received a letter from the person who wrote about me. And for the first time, she didn't try to speak over me. She listened. And she gave me back something I thought I'd lost for good, the right to tell my own story. The room erupted into applause, not wild or chaotic, but steady, sustained, and deeply human. Some people stood, others cried. And Noah, standing in the center of it all, didn't bow. He simply nodded once and stepped down. Backstage, the organizer hugged him, gently. "You just changed the way people think," she whispered. Noah didn't reply. He didn't need to. He went home that night without checking his phone. He didn't want to see the comments, the shares, the articles. Instead, he made tea. He sat by the window. He opened his laptops. And for the first time, he created a folder titled My Story. Noah didn't write it to sell it, or prove anything, or win anything back. He wrote because it was his past, his voice, his truth. And this time no one would take it. Months passed, the buzz faded. TEDx uploaded the video. It reached a few thousand views in the first week, then a few hundred more each month. Noah didn't track it. He didn't care about the numbers. What mattered was that it existed. It was out there not as someone else's interpretation, but as his. The world could receive it however it wanted. He had already received something more important, his own permission. In Bellevue, life settled back into routine. The library replaced Joyce's book display with a local Gardeners of the Year tribute. Noah kept working, kept caring, kept quiet. Not silent, just selective. He didn't need everyone to know him. He just needed to know he wasn't being misrepresented. Then one Monday morning, while delivering groceries to a new hospice resident, the nurse waved him over. "She's been asking for you by name," the nurse said softly. "Says she owes you something." The woman's name was Ruth, 77. Joyce's old Sunday school friend, sharp as ever. Despite the oxygen tubes and the weight loss, Noah entered the room slowly, unsure what to expect. She looked up from her chair and smiled. "I watched your talk," she said, 3 times. Then I sent it to my daughter." Noah sat down, unsure how to respond. "She's gay," Ruth continued. "Lives in Arizona. I haven't seen her in 9 years. We had differences. I told myself it was about morals, but the truth is it was about fear. Fear of what people would think of me. Then I saw you standing there, so calm, so whole. You weren't begging for acceptance. You were just there, proud of your truth." Noah swallowed hard. He hadn't expected this. Not here, not now. "I called her," Ruth said, eyes glassy. "She's coming next week." Noah reached for her hand. It was cold but steady. That night, he sat on his porch as the sun dipped below the trees. The air was cool, soft. The town was quiet. He thought about how strange healing was, how it never came in the form you expected. Sometimes it arrived through a stolen book, sometimes through a stranger's voice, and sometimes through a woman on a hospice bed, holding your hand as she found the courage to hold her daughter again. 2 days later, a small package arrived at Noah's doorstep. No return address, but he recognized the handwriting, Joyce's. Inside was her original manuscript, unedited, no dedications, no printed blurbs. Just a note tucked into the front. "This was the version before I tried to make it about you, before I got lost in the applause. I see now that my story was never supposed to start with your pain." Beneath it, wrapped in paper, was something else, a battered leather suitcase. Noah froze on it. It was his suitcase, the one he had left behind at his grandparents' house when he fled at 18, the one no one ever returned. It still had the faded initials he'd scrawled on the lining in Sharpie and W. Inside a bundle of letters he'd written but never mailed, an old family photo, and a cassette tape labeled Choir 2005 Christmas. He sat with it for hours. There was no apology grand enough to erase the past, no gift poetic enough to undo harm, But there was something sacred in being acknowledged, in having someone say, "I see what I took, and I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm just giving it back." The suitcase wasn't just luggage. It was memory. It was closure. It was the final page. A week later, the Bellevue Library quietly added a new pamphlet to its shelves. No banners, no press. It was a printed copy of Noah's TEDx talk, transcribed, stapled, and slipped between biographies and community essays. The last page read, "Submitted by local resident Noah Winters, with permission." And that, above all else, was the difference. Have you ever felt like your story was told without your voice? How did you respond? Would you speak up, stay silent, or reclaim it in your own way? We want to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments. If this story moved you, consider subscribing to Heart Stories. Here, every voice matters, especially the ones that were once taken.